At the airport, as we were about to check in for our family vacation, my parents suddenly told me they'd forgotten my passport and said, "Go get it while we handle everything here." When I rushed back an hour later, I found my 6-year-old daughter sitting alone as airport security was questioning her about missing parents. I asked her what happened and she tearfully said, "Grandma and Grandpa left me here to test if you'd really come back for me." I confronted my parents and they said coldly, "Sorry, we don't want deadweight on this trip." Mom added, "Your sister's perfect kids don't want her ruining their vacation." My sister loudly demanded, "Send us 5K more or she'll be abandoned here again." I stayed completely silent and made one call that left them all speechless. This happened 2 years ago, but I still remember that morning like it was yesterday. My name is Cameron, and I'm a single father to the most amazing little girl in the world, Zoe. She was 6 at the time, with pigtails that bounced when she walked and a gap-toothed smile that could light up any room. Zoe had been through more than any kid should have to endure. Her mother, Vanessa, had walked out on us when Zoe was barely 2 years old, deciding that motherhood wasn't for her after all. She left one Tuesday morning while Zoe was napping, leaving nothing but a note saying she needed to find herself and that we'd be better off without her. Since then, it had been just me and Zoe against the world. I worked as a software developer for a mid-sized tech company, which thankfully allowed me some flexibility with my schedule. Zoe was my entire universe, and I'd move heaven and earth to make sure she never felt abandoned or unloved again. Which made what happened at the airport that day so much more devastating. My parents, Franklin and Joyce, had always been complicated people. They were the type who kept score of every favor, every dollar spent, every slight they perceived. My younger sister Amber was their golden child, married to a successful lawyer named Derek, living in a picture-perfect suburban home with her 2 kids, Tyler and Madison, ages 8 and 10. Amber's kids were what my parents called well-behaved and accomplished. Tyler played violin and was already reading at high school level, while Madison was a competitive gymnast who'd won several regional competitions. Zoe, on the other hand, was just a normal 6-year-old. She liked cartoons, playing with dolls, and had recently developed an obsession with dinosaurs after watching Jurassic Park, probably too young for it, but she loved it. She wasn't a prodigy, she wasn't winning competitions, she was just a sweet, loving little girl who missed having a complete family. But apparently, that wasn't enough for my parents. The vacation had been planned for months. My parents had surprised us all by announcing they wanted to take the entire family to Hawaii for a week-long getaway. They said they'd cover all the expenses as an early Christmas gift to everyone. Zoe had been over the moon with excitement, talking about building sandcastles and seeing dolphins every single day leading up to the trip. I had my reservations about traveling with my family. There was always drama, always some undercurrent of tension, but Zoe was so happy that I pushed aside my concerns. The morning of our departure, we all met at the airport at 6 a.m. for our 9 a.m. flight. Zoe was practically vibrating with excitement, wearing her new Hawaii t-shirt and clutching her stuffed dinosaur, Rex. Amber's family looked like they'd stepped out of a travel magazine, perfectly coordinated outfits, expensive luggage, not a hair out of place. My parents were in their element, playing the role of generous grandparents, taking photos and making a big show of how wonderful this family vacation was going to be. Everything seemed normal as we approached the check-in counter. Zoe was chattering away to her cousins about all the things she wanted to do in Hawaii. Tyler and Madison were polite but distant, as they always were with Zoe. They'd been raised to think they were superior, and it showed in how they interacted with their lesser cousin. Then, just as we reached the counter, my father Franklin suddenly stopped and smacked his forehead dramatically. "Oh no," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Cameron, I just realized, we never checked that you had Zoe's passport with you." I looked at him confused. "What do you mean?" "I have both our passports right here in my carry-on." My mother Joyce shook her head with an exaggerated sigh. "No, sweetie, remember? You gave us Zoe's passport last week when we were organizing all the documents. We were going to hold on to all the family passports together, but then we forgot to give it back to you." I felt a cold dread starting to form in my stomach. "What are you talking about? I never gave you Zoe's passport. I have it right here." I reached into my bag, but even as I did, I had a sinking feeling. The passport wasn't there. "Oh honey," my mother continued with fake concern, "you must have left it at home. We definitely don't have it with us, we only brought ours and Amber's families." Now I was completely confused. I was absolutely certain I had packed Zoe's passport in the inner pocket of my carry-on bag, in the same place I always kept our travel documents. But somehow it was gone. Only later would I discover that Amber had distracted me earlier that morning while we were gathering at my parents' house, asking me to help her load something into their car, while my mother had quietly removed Zoe's passport from my bag when I stepped outside. Amber chimed in, checking her expensive watch. "Cameron, you need to go get it right now. Check-in closes in 2 hours, and if we miss this flight, we'll lose our reservations." I felt trapped and confused. I was absolutely certain I had packed Zoe's passport, but it wasn't in my bag. Maybe I had left it at home after all? The stress of traveling with a 6-year-old and making sure we had everything might have made me forget. "Look," my father said, putting his hand on my shoulder in what appeared to be a supportive gesture, "you go home and get the passport. We'll wait here in the departure area, we haven't gone through security yet. Just meet us back here at the check-in counter, okay?" Zoe looked up at me with those big brown eyes. Daddy, are we still going to Hawaii? Of course, sweetheart, I said, kneeling down to her level. Daddy just has to run home really quick to get something we forgot. You stay here with Grandma and Grandpa, okay? I'll be back before you know it. She nodded solemnly and gave me a hug. Hurry back, Daddy. I don't want to miss the airplane. I promise, baby girl. I'll be back soon. Looking back now, I should have trusted my instincts. Something felt off about the whole situation, but I was so focused on not ruining Zoe's vacation that I ignored the warning bells in my head. I rushed out of the airport, drove home like a maniac, tore apart my apartment looking for a passport that wasn't there, and then raced back to the airport. The whole round trip took about an hour and 15 minutes. When I got back to the airport, I went straight to the check-in area where I'd left them. But instead of finding my family waiting for me, I found Zoe sitting alone on a bench near the security checkpoint, tears streaming down her face, while two airport security officers were crouched down talking to her. My heart stopped. I ran over to them, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Excuse me, I said breathlessly to the security officers. This is my daughter. What's going on? The older officer, a woman with kind eyes, stood up to face me. Sir, are you Cameron Miller? Yes, that's me. Where is everyone? Where's my family? Sir, we found your daughter here alone about 20 minutes ago. She was crying and saying her grandparents had left her. We've been trying to locate her guardians. I felt like the world was spinning around me. That's impossible. They were supposed to be watching her while I went home to get her passport. I knelt down beside Zoe, who threw her arms around my neck and sobbed into my shoulder. Daddy, I was so scared. I thought you weren't coming back. Hey, it's okay, I said, holding her tight. Daddy's here now. Can you tell me what happened? Where did Grandma and Grandpa go? Through her tears, Zoe told me a story that made my blood run cold. After you left, Grandma and Grandpa said they had to go check something. They told me to sit right here and not move. Then Tyler and Madison and Aunt Amber and Uncle Derek all went with them. They said they'd be right back. The security officer interjected, Sir, that was over an hour ago. Your daughter has been sitting here alone all this time. I felt sick to my stomach. Zoe, sweetie, did they say anything else? Zoe nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. Grandma said it was a test. She said they wanted to see if you'd really come back for me, like Mommy didn't. The words hit me like a physical blow. My own parents had used my daughter's abandonment issues, her deepest fear, as some kind of twisted test. They had deliberately triggered the trauma of her mother leaving her. Sir, the security officer said gently, do you know where your family might be? Before I could answer, I heard a familiar voice behind me. There they are. I turned around to see my entire family walking toward us, my parents, Amber, Derek, and their kids. They all looked relaxed, like they'd just been shopping or grabbing coffee. None of them looked concerned or worried about Zoe being alone with security. I stood up slowly, Zoe still clinging to my leg. Where the hell have you been? My father Franklin shrugged casually. We were just taking care of some things. Did you find the passport? Did I find the? I stared at him in disbelief. You left my 6-year-old daughter alone at the airport for over an hour. Security found her crying. My mother Joyce rolled her eyes. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Cameron. She was fine. We could see her the whole time. You could see her the whole time? Then why didn't you help her when she was crying? Why did you let security think she was abandoned? Amber stepped forward with that condescending smile she'd perfected over the years. Cameron, calm down. It's not that big of a deal. We needed to see if you were really committed to being here for Zoe. What the hell does that mean? My father's expression grew cold. It means we needed to know if you'd actually show up when she needed you, or if you'd abandon her like her mother did. The cruelty of it took my breath away. They had deliberately recreated Zoe's worst nightmare, being left alone by the people who were supposed to love and protect her, just to test me. Are you insane? I said, my voice rising. She's 6 years old. You traumatized her. My mother Joyce's facade finally dropped completely. Look, Cameron, we need to talk. We've been discussing this as a family, and we've decided that this vacation would be better if it was just adults and well-behaved children. What are you saying? We're saying, my father continued coldly, that we don't want Zoe on this trip. She's dead weight. She slows everyone down, she's not at the same level as Tyler and Madison, and frankly, we don't want to spend our vacation babysitting. I felt like I was in some kind of nightmare. She's your granddaughter. She's a constant reminder of your failures, my mother shot back. Sarah left because she couldn't handle the responsibility, and now you expect us to pick up the slack? Amber nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. My kids have been looking forward to having quality time with their grandparents without having to include Zoe in everything. She brings down the whole dynamic. Tyler and Madison were standing behind their parents, looking uncomfortable but not saying anything. Zoe was still clinging to my leg, and I could feel her little body shaking. Cameron, my mother continued in that fake sweet voice she used when she was being particularly manipulative, your sister's perfect kids don't want Zoe ruining their vacation. This is supposed to be a special family trip. I stared at them all, trying to process what I was hearing. So what exactly are you proposing? My sister Amber stepped forward with a smug expression. Here's the deal. We'll give you two options. Either you take Zoe home right now and we continue with our vacation as planned, or you send us $5,000 more for a first-class upgrade and private activities to keep her separated from our kids during the trip. And if I don't agree to either option? Amber shrugged. Then we'll just leave her here again. Maybe next time you won't come back fast enough. The threat was clear. They were willing to abandon my daughter at the airport if I didn't comply with their demands. Looking at Zoe's tear-stained face, seeing the fear in her eyes, I realized this wasn't just about a vacation. This was about power, control, and their twisted view of what our family should look like. But what they didn't know was that I had been recording our entire conversation on my phone. I had started recording the moment I saw Zoe with airport security, instinctively knowing that something was very wrong. In our state, it was legal to record conversations as long as one party consented, which I did. I had captured everything: their admissions of deliberately abandoning a 6-year-old child, their threats to do it again, and their demands for money. I looked at all of them: my parents, my sister, her husband, even their kids who were old enough to understand what was happening, and felt a calm settle over me. They expected me to cave, to either leave with Zoe or pay their ridiculous demand. They thought they held all the cards. Instead, I stayed completely silent and pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I had memorized years ago but never thought I'd need to use. Hello, Child Protective Services? I need to report child abandonment and endangerment. The change in their expressions was immediate and priceless. Amber went white as a sheet. Derek started sputtering about how this was all a misunderstanding. My parents looked like deer caught in headlights. Yes, I continued calmly into the phone. I'm at the airport with my 6-year-old daughter who was deliberately abandoned by her grandparents as some kind of test. I have the entire conversation recorded, including threats to abandon her again if I don't pay them money. Cameron, hang up the phone, my father said urgently. Let's talk about this. I ignored him and continued speaking to the CPS worker. They're also here with 2 other children, ages 8 and 10, who witnessed this entire event and whose parents were complicit in the abandonment. Amber lunged for my phone. You can't do this. You're going to ruin everything. I stepped back, keeping Zoe behind me. I'm also going to need to speak with airport security again, as this appears to be a pattern of behavior. The security officers who had been helping Zoe were still nearby, and they had definitely overheard at least part of our conversation. The older female officer approached us again. Sir, do you need assistance? Yes, I said. I'd like to file a formal complaint about child abandonment. I have recordings of the entire incident, and I believe these individuals pose a continued threat to my daughter's safety. What happened next was like watching dominoes fall. Airport security called their supervisors. The police were called to take statements. And through it all, my family went from arrogant and demanding to panicked and desperate. About an hour later, a CPS emergency worker arrived. Due to the airport location and the serious nature of the allegations, they had dispatched someone immediately. My parents tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding and that they never meant to actually abandon Zoe. Amber insisted they were just teaching me a lesson about responsibility. Derek, being a lawyer, kept trying to argue that no actual crime had been committed since Zoe was never truly unsupervised. But the recordings told a different story. I had clear audio of them admitting to deliberately leaving Zoe alone, calling her deadweight, threatening to abandon her again, and demanding money. I also had the testimony of the security officers who found Zoe crying and alone. The CPS worker who arrived was a middle-aged man named Tom Rodriguez, and he was not impressed with my family's explanations. After interviewing Zoe privately, with me present, he made it clear that this was a serious matter. What you've described, he told my parents, constitutes child endangerment at minimum. You deliberately placed a 6-year-old child in a situation where she felt abandoned and unsafe, and you've admitted to doing so as a form of manipulation. My mother tried her fake sweet voice again. But we were watching her the whole time. Ma'am, Tom replied firmly, the child was found by airport security crying and alone. She believed she had been abandoned. The intent behind her actions doesn't change the trauma you inflicted on this child. Meanwhile, the airport authorities were dealing with their own concerns. Apparently, deliberately abandoning a child at an airport, even temporarily, was taken very seriously in the post-9/11 world. There were questions about how they had managed to get through security and leave Zoe behind, whether this was part of some larger scheme, and what their true intentions had been. As all of this was unfolding, I was primarily focused on Zoe. She was exhausted, scared, and confused by everything that was happening around her. I held her close and tried to explain what I could in age-appropriate terms. Daddy, she whispered, are we still going to Hawaii? No, sweetheart, I said softly. We're going to go home instead. Would you like that? She nodded against my chest. I just want to be with you, Daddy. I don't want anyone to leave me again. I will never leave you, Zoe. Never. I promise. The investigation took several hours. During that time, my family's planned vacation fell apart completely. They missed their flight, their hotel reservations were in jeopardy, and Amber's perfect family image was crumbling as airport security and CPS workers documented everything. Derek kept trying to use his legal knowledge to minimize the situation, but he wasn't a criminal lawyer, and this wasn't his jurisdiction. Amber was furious, alternating between blaming me for overreacting and begging me to drop the complaint so they could salvage their vacation. My parents were perhaps the most pathetic. They kept trying to play the victim, claiming that they were just concerned grandparents who wanted what was best for everyone. They insisted that they loved Zoe and would never hurt her, conveniently forgetting their own recorded words about her being deadweight. But the most telling moment came when Tom Rodriguez asked Tyler and Madison privately what they had witnessed. Tyler, being 8, was old enough to understand right from wrong but still innocent enough to tell the truth. Madison, at 10, was more aware of family dynamics but still spoke honestly when questioned away from her parents. Both children admitted that they had heard their grandparents and parents talking about dealing with the Zoe problem before we even got to the airport. It hadn't been a spontaneous decision, it had been planned. Tyler said his parents and grandparents had discussed this plan the night before. Tom told me privately. They had deliberately taken Zoe's passport from your bag when you weren't looking, specifically to create a situation where they could abandon her. The betrayal was complete. This hadn't been some spur-of-the-moment decision or a test that got out of hand. They had actively plotted to traumatize my daughter, stealing her passport to ensure I would have to leave her alone with them. When I confronted them with this information, Amber finally lost her composure completely. "Fine," she screamed in the middle of the airport terminal. "We didn't want her there. She's weird and awkward and she makes our kids uncomfortable. This vacation was supposed to be perfect, and she would have ruined it." Her outburst was witnessed by dozens of travelers and recorded by security cameras. Derek looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "Amber," he hissed, "stop talking. Now." But she was past the point of caring about consequences. Years of resentment came pouring out. Cameron has never been able to control his life. His wife left him, his daughter is a constant burden, and he expects everyone else to accommodate his failures. We've been supporting him and pretending to care about Zoe for years, and we're tired of it. "No one asked you to pretend anything," I said quietly. "I thought you loved her because she was family." "Family?" Amber laughed bitterly. "She's not really family. She's the product of Cameron's poor choices, and now we all have to suffer for it." Even my parents looked uncomfortable with Amber's outburst, but they didn't defend Zoe or contradict anything she said. Their silence was as damning as Amber's words. The CPS investigation concluded with several outcomes. First, my parents and Amber were formally investigated for child endangerment. While criminal charges were ultimately not filed, the legal system is frustratingly lenient when it comes to family members. CPS opened a file on all of them and flagged them as potentially dangerous to Zoe's welfare. The investigation process itself was thorough and humiliating for them. Tom Rodriguez conducted separate interviews with each family member, and their stories didn't align. Amber claimed it was all my father's idea, while my parents insisted Amber had pressured them into it. Derek tried to distance himself by claiming he had only gone along with his wife's plan. Tyler and Madison, when interviewed by a child psychologist, revealed even more disturbing details about conversations they had overheard at family gatherings where Zoe was routinely mocked and dismissed. During one particularly revealing interview, the child psychologist asked Madison what she thought about her cousin Zoe. Madison, being 10 and not yet fully understanding the implications of her words, honestly said, "Mom says Zoe is different because her mom left her, and that makes family trips hard. Grandma says we have to be patient with her, but that doesn't mean we can't have special time without her sometimes." When Tom Rodriguez shared this with me, I felt physically sick. They hadn't just abandoned Zoe at the airport, they had been poisoning her cousins against her for years, teaching them to view her as defective and unworthy. The airport incident was just the culmination of years of emotional abuse that I had been too blind to see. The recording I had made became crucial evidence, but what really sealed their fate was additional security footage that airport authorities pulled from their surveillance system. The cameras had captured my family walking away from Zoe, showing them looking back at her crying alone and continuing to walk away. It showed them sitting in a restaurant with a clear view of where Zoe was sitting, watching as security officers approached her, and making no move to help. Most damning of all, the footage showed Amber laughing while pointing at Zoe talking to the security officers. She was actually amused by my daughter's distress. When this footage was presented during the investigation, even Derek looked shocked at his wife's callousness. The psychological evaluation that was part of the CPS investigation revealed that Zoe had been showing signs of anxiety and depression that I had attributed to her mother's abandonment, but which likely stemmed from years of subtle rejection and emotional abuse from her extended family. Dr. Talia Williams, the psychologist who evaluated Zoe, noted that she exhibited hypervigilance around adults, constantly watching for signs that she was about to be rejected or abandoned. "Your daughter has been living in a state of chronic stress," Dr. Williams explained to me. "She's been conditioned to believe that love is conditional and that she has to earn her place in the family." The airport incident was traumatic, but it was built on a foundation of years of emotional neglect and rejection. This revelation hit me harder than anything else. I had been so focused on trying to maintain family relationships that I had failed to protect Zoe from people who saw her as less than worthy of basic love and respect. I had subjected her to family gatherings where she was barely tolerated, hoping that eventually they would come to love her the way I did. The investigation also uncovered financial manipulation that I hadn't been aware of. Apparently, my parents had been telling Amber and Derek for years that they were supporting Zoe and me financially, when in reality they had never given us a dime. They had been portraying themselves as generous grandparents who were being taken advantage of by their irresponsible son. This lie had been used to justify their resentment toward Zoe and to paint me as a burden on the family. When Derek discovered this lie during the investigation, it caused a significant rift in his marriage to Amber. He had believed that his in-laws were contributing to Zoe's care and had supported their decision to set boundaries based on that false information. Learning that they had been lying about their financial contributions while simultaneously bad-mouthing a 6-year-old child shook his faith in his wife's family. Second, after a separate legal process, I was granted a restraining order that prevented any of them from being alone with Zoe or contacting her without my supervision. This was based on the recordings, the witness statements, and the clear evidence of planning. The family court judge who heard my petition was not sympathetic to their claims that this was just a family misunderstanding. The restraining order hearing was particularly satisfying. My parents and Amber had hired their own lawyer who tried to argue that this was all a family misunderstanding that had been blown out of proportion. He claimed that grandparents had the right to set boundaries with their grandchildren, and that what happened was within normal family dynamics. Judge Patricia Morrison was having none of it. She had reviewed all the evidence, including the recordings, the security footage, and the psychological evaluations. When Amber's lawyer tried to minimize the situation, Judge Morrison cut him off. "Counselor," she said sternly, "I have listened to recordings of your clients calling a 6-year-old child deadweight and threatening to abandon her at an airport if her father didn't pay them money. I have seen security footage of them walking away from a crying child and later laughing about her distress. This is not normal family discipline, this is emotional abuse and child endangerment." She granted the restraining order immediately and made it clear that any violation would result in immediate criminal charges. She also ordered that any future contact with Zoe would require supervision by a court-appointed social worker, at their expense. Third, and perhaps most satisfying to me, their actions had consequences beyond just legal ones. Derek's law firm was not pleased when they learned that one of their partners had been involved in a child endangerment investigation at an airport. While he wasn't fired, his prospects for advancement were severely damaged. Amber's perfect social media life also took a hit when word spread about what had happened. She had built her entire identity around being the perfect mother and wife, and having CPS involved in an investigation shattered that image. My parents faced consequences in their retirement community, where news of their treatment of their granddaughter spread quickly. The community was small and tight-knit, and they found themselves increasingly isolated as their friends learned what they had done. But the real victory wasn't in their consequences, it was in Zoe's recovery. We started therapy immediately to help her process what had happened and to reinforce that she was loved and would never be abandoned. It took time, but gradually she began to trust again that I would always come back for her, that she was wanted and valued. Zoe's therapist, Dr. Linda Chen, was instrumental in helping her work through the trauma. We also built new traditions together. Instead of that Hawaii vacation, Zoe and I took a long weekend trip to a dinosaur museum she'd been wanting to visit. We stayed in a hotel with a pool, 8 room service, and spent hours looking at fossil exhibits. She declared it the best vacation ever, and I realized that all she had ever wanted was to feel loved and included. 6 months after the airport incident, I received a letter from my parents. They claimed they had been going to therapy and had realized their mistakes. They wanted to make amends and have a relationship with Zoe again. The letter was full of the right words about love and family and second chances. I showed the letter to Zoe's therapist, Dr. Linda Chen, who had been working with us since the incident. She read it carefully and then looked at me with a skeptical expression. "Cameron," she said, "this reads like someone who's been coached on what to say rather than someone who genuinely understands what they did wrong. There's no real acknowledgement of the trauma they caused Zoe, just vague statements about mistakes." I had to agree. The letter felt hollow and manipulative, much like my parents themselves. There was no mention of their recorded statements calling Zoe deadweight, no acknowledgement of the premeditated nature of their actions, and no real understanding of how their behavior had affected a 6-year-old child. I wrote back a simple response: "Zoe and I are building a life based on trust, safety, and unconditional love. Until you can genuinely understand and take responsibility for the trauma you inflicted on a 6-year-old child, and until you can prove through consistent actions over time that you've changed, we won't be resuming contact. Zoe's well-being is my only priority." I never heard from them again. Amber made a few attempts to reach out through mutual friends, claiming that I was keeping the family apart and that Zoe needed her grandparents. But these messages always focused on what she thought Zoe needed rather than acknowledging what they had done wrong. It was clear that even after everything, they still didn't understand that they were the problem. A year after the incident, I ran into Derek at a local coffee shop. He looked older, more tired than I remembered. He approached me hesitantly. "Cameron," he said quietly, "I wanted to apologize for what happened at the airport. That wasn't right, what we did to Zoe." I studied his face, looking for signs of genuine remorse versus just embarrassment at being caught. "Do you understand why it was wrong, Derek?" He nodded slowly. "We used a little girl's trauma to manipulate you. We put her through something terrible just to prove a point. There's no excuse for that." It was the first real acknowledgement of wrongdoing I had heard from any of them. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "It means something that you understand. Is there any chance?" He started, then stopped. No, never mind. I don't have the right to ask. What were you going to say? I was going to ask if there was any way to make things right, but I realized that's not my decision to make. It's Zoe's, and she shouldn't have to forgive us just because we want her to. That conversation gave me some hope that at least one member of my family might genuinely understand the gravity of what they had done. But Derek was still married to Amber, and he had children who had been taught to view Zoe as lesser. Even if he personally felt remorse, the family dynamics that had led to the airport incident were still in place. 2 years after everything happened, Zoe started second grade. She was thriving in school, had made several good friends, and her therapist said she was doing remarkably well considering what she had been through. She still occasionally had nightmares about being left alone, but they were becoming less frequent. One day, she came home from school with a drawing she had made in art class. It was a picture of the two of us standing together, holding hands, with a big heart drawn around us. At the bottom, in her careful second grade handwriting, she had written my family. "Daddy," she said as she showed me the picture, "my teacher asked us to draw our families. Some kids drew lots of people, but I just drew us. Is that okay?" I knelt down to her level and looked into those brown eyes that had seen too much sadness for someone so young. "Zoe, family isn't about how many people you have. It's about people who love you no matter what, who would never leave you behind, and who make you feel safe and happy. So yes, this is perfect." She beamed at me. "Good, because you're the best family ever, Daddy." As I write this story today, 2 years later, Zoe is 8 years old and flourishing. She's still obsessed with dinosaurs, though she's also developed interests in soccer and drawing. She has sleepovers with friends, gets good grades, and has the kind of carefree childhood that every kid deserves. She sometimes asks about her grandparents and aunt, and I've tried to explain the situation in age-appropriate ways. I've told her that sometimes adults make bad choices that hurt children, and that my job as her dad is to keep her safe from those kinds of situations. She seems to understand and accept this explanation. The truth is, I don't miss my parents or Amber. I miss the idea of what they could have been, loving grandparents who cherished Zoe, a sister who supported me through single parenthood, a family that actually cared about each other. But I don't miss the reality of their judgment, manipulation, and cruelty. Zoe and I have built our own family traditions. We take a vacation together every year on the anniversary of the airport incident, not to remember the trauma, but to celebrate our bond and the life we've built together. We've been to that dinosaur museum 4 times now, visited national parks, gone to the beach, and explored new cities. Each trip reinforces to Zoe that she is wanted, valued, and loved. I've also found my own support system among other single parents in our community. We help each other with childcare, celebrate our kids' achievements together, and provide the kind of family support that Zoe and I don't get from our biological relatives. Zoe has several honorary aunts and uncles who have shown her what healthy family relationships look like. The incident at the airport taught me several important lessons. First, that biology doesn't automatically make someone family, love, respect, and commitment do. Second, that protecting my daughter from toxic people is more important than maintaining relationships just because they're family. And third, that Zoe and I are stronger together than we ever were as part of that dysfunctional extended family. Looking back, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't recorded that conversation, if I hadn't called CPS, if I had just taken Zoe home and tried to smooth things over as I had done so many times before. I think they would have continued to escalate their treatment of her, using her as a pawn in their games and gradually wearing down her self-esteem until she believed she really was deadweight. Instead, by standing up to them in that moment, I showed Zoe that she was worth fighting for. I demonstrated that no one, not even grandparents, had the right to treat her as less than worthy of love and respect. And I gave her the gift of a childhood free from people who saw her as a burden rather than a blessing. The one call I made that day didn't just leave them speechless, it changed the entire trajectory of our lives. It freed us from a toxic family dynamic and allowed us to build something better. Zoe learned that she has a father who will always choose her well-being over keeping the peace, and I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is cut ties with people who refuse to treat your child with basic human dignity. Today, Zoe is a confident, happy, well-adjusted kid who knows she is loved unconditionally. She has never again had to wonder if someone would come back for her, because she knows without a doubt that I always will. And that knowledge has given her the security to grow into the amazing person she's becoming. As for my parents and Amber, I have no idea how their lives turned out after that day at the airport. I blocked them on all social media, changed our phone number, and made it clear through mutual friends that any attempts to contact us would be considered harassment. They made their choice when they decided to use a 6-year-old child as a weapon in their twisted games. I made mine when I chose to protect her from them. The best revenge, it turns out, wasn't getting them in trouble or seeing them face consequences, though I won't lie and say I didn't enjoy watching their perfect vacation plans crumble. The best revenge was building a life so full of love, joy, and genuine family bonds that their absence became a blessing rather than a loss. Zoe and I are proof that families can be rebuilt, that trauma can be healed, and that sometimes walking away from toxic people is the most powerful thing you can do. We're living our best life, and we're doing it without the people who thought we weren't worth their basic decency and love. Just last month, Zoe came home from school with exciting news. Her teacher had assigned a project about family heroes, and she had chosen me. As she read her presentation aloud that evening, my heart swelled with pride. "My dad is my hero because he always keeps his promises," she read in her clear 8-year-old voice. "When bad people tried to hurt me, he protected me. When I was scared, he made me feel safe. And when I asked him if he would ever leave me like my first mom did, he said never, and I believe him because he always tells the truth." She looked up at me with those same brown eyes that had been filled with tears at the airport 2 years ago, but now they sparkled with confidence and joy. "Daddy, did I do good?" "You did perfect, sweetheart," I said, pulling her into a hug. "Just like you always do." That night, as I tucked her into bed, Zoe said something that made me realize how completely we had healed from that terrible day. "Daddy, I'm glad those people aren't in our family anymore. Our family is much better now, just me and you and all our friends who really love us." "You're absolutely right, Zoe. We have the perfect family. Can we go see the dinosaurs again next weekend?" "Anything for you, kiddo. Anything for you." As I turned off her bedroom light and watched her drift off to sleep, clutching Rex the dinosaur, I knew that the scared little girl who had been abandoned at that airport was gone forever. In her place was a confident, loved, secure child who knew beyond any doubt that she would never be left behind again. The best revenge isn't always about making the people who hurt you suffer. Sometimes it's about building something so beautiful and strong that their absence becomes a gift. Zoe and I didn't just survive what they did to us, we thrived because of it. And that's a happy ending worth fighting for.